The coffee went cold before she realized he wasn't coming. Booth 7 empty for the first time in 3 years. And then the door opened. 2 bodyguards. A man in a black suit. Eyes like violence waiting for permission. He didn't order. He just looked at her. "You're Mabel Rossi," he said. Not a question. An accusation. Her voice caught. "Yes? You've been helping my father." And just like that, kindness became the most dangerous thing she'd ever offered. What if the loneliest man in your diner wasn't broken by the world, but by the empire he built on blood and regret? If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. Mabel Rossi was 26 years old and running on fumes financially, emotionally, spiritually. Kindness cost nothing, so she gave it freely. Her recipient was Vincent, a quiet ghost who wore the same brown fedora every morning and sat by the window like he was waiting for death to remember his address. She poured his coffee without asking, cut his toast into neat triangles, spoke to him like he mattered. She thought he was just another forgotten soul. She didn't know his name was written in blood across Brooklyn. She didn't know his silence was armor. And she certainly didn't know that his son, the youngest, most ruthless mafia boss in the city, was about to walk through that door with murder in his eyes and 2 bodyguards at his back. Because one cold Tuesday morning, Vincent's booth stayed empty. And when the door finally opened, it wasn't for coffee, it was for her. The bell above Luna's diner sang its tired song at 5:30 a.m., and Mabel Rossi was already behind the counter, tying her apron with practiced efficiency. The diner was a relic cracked vinyl booths, the color of dried blood, linoleum that stayed sticky no matter how hard she scrubbed, and the permanent smell of burnt coffee and broken dreams. For 3 years, this had been her stage. She moved through the narrow aisles with a grace born of necessity, carrying plates, refilling cups, manufacturing warmth, even when her own heart felt frozen. At 26, she was drowning slowly in her mother's leftover medical bills and rent that climbed faster than her tips. Her art supplies sat in boxes she couldn't bear to open. The morning regulars filtered in like clockwork. Sal, the taxi driver, ordered 2 eggs over easy. The nurses from Mercy Hospital traded horror stories over pancakes. The construction crew rolled in loud and hungry. And at 7:30 a.m., exactly, Vincent Cowley shuffled through the door. Same brown fedora, same soft gray coat, same worn leather shoes whispering against the floor. He never acknowledged anyone, just made his way to booth 7 by the window, the one that caught the morning light through rain-streaked glass. Vincent was different from the others. He was a ghost trying to disappear in plain sight. Lou, her perpetually stressed boss, had warned her the first day. "Don't waste your charm. He doesn't talk, doesn't tip. Just give him black coffee and move on." Brenda, the veteran waitress with the disposition of a rattlesnake, had been more direct. That booth could seat 4 people during rush. Instead, we get Mr. Sunshine hogging real estate. But Mabel saw something else. She saw hands that trembled reaching for sugar. She saw eyes that stared out the window searching for something that would never come back. She saw loneliness she recognized in her own mirror, so she ignored Lou's advice. "Good morning," she said that first day, placing coffee down gently. Vincent grunted, didn't look up. For 2 weeks she tried, smiled, made conversation with silence, brought him fresh coffee before he asked. Then one Monday, Mabel noticed his arthritic fingers struggling with the butter knife, trembling as he tried to cut his toast. His jaw clenched in frustration and shame. She didn't think. She just acted. "Here, let me help with that." Vincent's hands froze. For the first time, he looked up, really looked at her. His gray eyes were storm clouds carrying decades of untold stories. Mabel cut his toast into 4 perfect triangles. Neat, manageable, kind. The diner noise faded into silence. Vincent's voice came out like gravel and smoke. "Thank you, miss." 2 words. But they landed like a benediction. "You're welcome, I'm Mabel." He nodded once. Sharp, deliberate. Something had shifted. Some wall had cracked. From that morning forward, it became their ritual. She'd cut his toast without asking. He'd nod his thanks. Sometimes he'd mention the weather. Once, he told her the rain reminded him of his late wife. Another time, he noticed her doodle on the order pad. "You're talented," he'd said quietly. The compliment stayed with her for days. To everyone else, Vincent remained invisible. To Lou, barely worth the register space. To Brenda, a daily irritation. But to Mabel, Vincent became proof that small kindnesses mattered. That even in a world this hard, there was room for gentleness. She had no idea she was pouring coffee for a man who'd once ruled Brooklyn's underworld. She had no idea Vincent Callie was a name whispered in dark rooms. She had no idea his son was coming. Because one Tuesday morning, Vincent's booth stayed empty. The coffee she'd poured at 7:28 sat cooling, untouched. And at 7:45, 3 men in expensive suits stepped through the door. The leader's eyes swept the room and landed on Mabel. He walked toward her with dangerous confidence. "You're Mabel," he said. Not a question. An accusation. "Yes? You've been helping my father." And Mabel understood. Kindness had just become the most dangerous thing she'd ever offered. Don't scroll past kindness that turns deadly. Subscribe now, because stories like this remind you how fragile ordinary really is. Miss it, and you'll never see how far one quiet act can push destiny. The man standing before Mabel radiated danger the way the sun radiates heat, constant, inescapable, impossible to ignore. Frank Callie didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone had turned Luna's diner into a held breath. "My father," he repeated, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "Vincent Callie, you've been taking care of him." Mabel's fingers tightened around the coffee pot. Her mind raced through every morning, every cut triangle of toast, every quiet conversation. The weight of his stare made her feel like she'd committed a crime she didn't know existed. I just served him breakfast," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's all." Something flickered across Frank's face, surprise, maybe, that she'd spoken at all. Most people, she suspected, didn't talk back to him. They just moved out of his way and prayed he'd forget they existed. "That's all?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You cut his food. Talked to him like he mattered. Made him feel human again." He paused, and the silence felt like falling. "Do you know what that makes you? A waitress doing her job? Dangerous." The word hung between them like smoke. Behind Frank, his bodyguards remained perfectly still, hands folded, eyes scanning the room with the efficiency of men trained to identify threats before they materialized. Mabel's heart hammered against her ribs, but something in her refused to break. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was 3 years of swallowing her pride for lousy tips and groping hands. Maybe it was just that she had so little left to lose. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. "Vincent. He's never missed a morning." Frank's expression shifted a crack in the marble. For just a moment she saw grief flicker across his face before the mask returned. "That's not your concern. He's my customer. He's my—" She stopped herself before saying friend, because what were they, really? A waitress and a silent old man who'd found comfort in routine. But Frank caught it anyway. His jaw tightened. "Your friend," he finished for her, and the word sounded like an accusation. "My father doesn't have friends. He has ghosts. He has regrets. He stopped, shook his head as if clearing it. "He's in the hospital. Heart attack. 2 days ago." The coffee pot nearly slipped from Mabel's hands. Will he be okay?" "He's alive." Frank pulled a crisp $100 bill from his pocket and placed it on the counter with precise, controlled movements. "For his breakfasts. All of them. Consider his tab closed." It felt like a dismissal. Like payment for services rendered, the way you'd settle an account before closing a business relationship forever. "I don't want your money," Mabel heard herself say. Frank's eyes narrowed. "Everyone wants my money. I wanted to help him. There's a difference." For a long moment, Frank just stared at her. The diner remained frozen, Sal's eggs getting cold, the construction crew suddenly fascinated by their plates, even Brenda silent for once in her miserable life. Then Frank leaned forward, just slightly, and lowered his voice. "People who help my father have a habit of discovering things they shouldn't, of asking questions that get them hurt. So here's what's going to happen, Mabel Rossi." Her name in his mouth sounded like a threat and a promise. "You're going to take this money. You're going to forget Vincent ever sat in that booth. And you're going to pretend this conversation never happened. And if I don't?" His smile was winter. "Then you'll find out why people cross the street when they see me coming." He straightened, turned toward the door. His bodyguards moved in perfect synchronization. The bell jingled as they prepared to leave. "Mr. Callie," Mabel called out, surprising herself. He paused, didn't turn around. "Tell Vincent." Her voice caught. "Tell him his toast will be waiting, whenever he's ready." Frank's shoulders tensed. For 3 heartbeats, he stood there, a statue in an expensive suit. Then, without turning, without acknowledging her words, he walked out into the gray morning. The door closed. The spell broke. Sound rushed back into Luna's silverware clinking, conversations resuming, Lou yelling something about orders backing up. But Mabel couldn't move. She stared at the $100 bill on the counter, at Vincent's empty booth by the window, at the rain that had started falling harder now, streaking down the glass like tears. Brenda appeared at her elbow. "Girl, do you have any idea who that was?" Mabel shook her head. "That," Brenda whispered, eyes wide, "was Frank Callie. The Frank Callie. He runs half of Brooklyn. People who cross him end up in the river." Mabel looked down at the $100 bill, then at Vincent's booth, then at the rain, and she knew, with the certainty of thunder following lightning, that her life had just become very, very complicated. Ever had something vanish right before the truth? Hit subscribe. Before this story takes the turn no one saw coming. Skip it, and you'll spend the night wondering what was inside that car. 3 days passed like bruises, slow, painful, deepening with time. Mabel couldn't stop thinking about Vincent's empty booth. Every morning at 7:30, she'd pour a cup of coffee out of habit, then stare at it cooling by the window, until Lou barked at her to stop wasting product. She'd tucked Frank's $100 bill into her apron pocket, unable to spend it, unable to throw it away. It felt like blood money, like a severance package for a relationship she'd never agreed to end. The diner felt different now. Smaller. Like the walls had moved closer when she wasn't looking. Brenda watched her with a mixture of pity and fascination. "You're mooning over a mobster's daddy," she'd said on day 2, refilling salt shakers. "That's a Lifetime movie waiting to happen, and not one of the good ones." But Mabel couldn't explain it. Vincent had been more than a customer. He'd been a reminder that kindness still mattered, that small gestures could bridge chasms of loneliness. Losing him felt like losing proof that her life meant something beyond balancing plates and forcing smiles. On the 4th morning, Mabel arrived at 5:30 to find something waiting on the diner's doorstep. A brown fedora. Vincent's fedora. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The felt was soft, worn smooth by years of handling. Inside the band, she found a small piece of paper folded into a square. Her name was written on it in shaky handwriting. "Mabel, you reminded an old man what love once felt like. If my son ever finds peace, it will be because of you. The world made him hard. Please don't let it make you the same. With gratitude, Vincent." She read it 3 times, standing in the pre-dawn darkness, tears blurring the words. It felt like a goodbye, like a benediction and a warning wrapped together. Inside the diner, she placed the fedora on the shelf behind the counter, next to the coffee filters and the dusty plastic flowers Lou's late wife had put there a decade ago. It felt right keeping Vincent close, even if just in memory. The morning shift began. Sal came in for his eggs. The nurses ordered their pancakes. The construction crew arrived, loud as always. But at 7:30, Vincent's booth remained empty. At 7:45, the bell above the door chimed. Mabel looked up, hope fluttering stupidly in her chest. Maybe Vincent had recovered. Maybe he was coming back. But it wasn't Vincent. It was Frank Callie. Alone this time. No bodyguards. No intimidating entourage. Just him in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, standing in the doorway like he was trying to decide whether to stay or run. The diner didn't go silent this time. People hadn't seen him before, didn't recognize the danger. They just kept eating, kept talking, kept living their ordinary lives, while something extraordinary unfolded. Frank's eyes found hers immediately. He walked to the counter with less confidence than before, like each step cost him something. "Coffee," he said. His voice was rougher than she remembered. Tired. Mabel grabbed a mug, not the chipped blue one Vincent preferred, but close and poured. Her hands were steady. She was getting good at performing calm, while her insides screamed. "Black, 2 sugars," she said, remembering how Vincent took his. Frank's expression cracked, just slightly. "You remember." "I remember all my regulars. I'm not a regular." "Then why are you here?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Frank wrapped both hands around the mug as if drawing warmth from it, even though the diner was stifling. "My father woke up yesterday," he said finally. "Asked about you. First thing he said when he opened his eyes, 'Is the girl with the kind smile okay?'" Frank's jaw tightened. "He was dying and he was worried about you." Mabel's throat constricted. "Can I see him?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you're a complication." Frank looked up, and his eyes were devastation wrapped in expensive tailoring. My father spent 5 years hiding from his past. From me, from what our family became. And you, he stopped, shook his head. You made him want to stay in this world. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Dangerous for who? For you. The words came out harsh. My enemies don't care about waitresses with kind smiles. They care about leverage, weaknesses. And my father just announced to a hospital full of people that you matter to him. Mabel set down the coffee pot with deliberate care. I didn't ask for this. Neither did he. Neither did I. Frank stood abruptly, pulled out his wallet. Stay away from my father. Stay away from me. Forget. Booth 7, Mabel interrupted. Vincent sat in booth 7. And I'm not forgetting him just because you're scared. Frank's eyes went dark. I'm not scared. Then what are you? Smart enough to know that people around my family don't survive kindness. He dropped 2 20s on the counter and walked out. But this time, he left his coffee unfinished. And Mabel knew he'd be back. Frank Kelly returned the next morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Each time, he came alone. Each time, he ordered black coffee with 2 sugars. Each time, he sat at the counter instead of Vincent's booth close enough to watch Mabel work, far enough to maintain the illusion of distance. He never stayed long. 20 minutes, maybe 30. He'd drink his coffee in silence, leave exact change, and walk out without a word. But his presence filled the diner like smoke thick, inescapable, changing the air itself. By the 5th morning, Brenda was practically vibrating with curiosity. That's Frank Callie, she hissed, while they prepped for the breakfast rush. Coming here every day like we're Starbucks. Do you know what this means? That he likes our coffee? Mabel kept her voice light, but her hands trembled slightly as she stacked plates. It means he's interested. And when men like Frank Callie get interested in girls like you, Brenda's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. People end up as headlines. Mabel wanted to argue but couldn't, because Brenda was right about one thing. Frank was interested. Not romantically, at least. She didn't think so. It was something else. Something that felt like he was trying to solve a puzzle, and she was the piece that didn't fit anywhere. On the 6th morning, Frank broke the silence. Why'd you do it? He asked as she refilled his cup. Mabel didn't pretend not to understand. Because he looked lonely. Lots of people look lonely. You don't cut their food. His hands shook. He needed help. And you just helped. Without wanting anything in return. Frank said it like he was describing something impossible. A unicorn. A miracle. That's generally how kindness works. His laugh was bitter. Not in my world. Mabel set down the coffee pot and leaned against the counter, studying him. Up close, the fear people felt made sense. Frank Callie was carved from contradictions, beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, controlled in a way that suggested violence constantly held in check. His suit was impeccable. His hands were scarred. Then maybe, she said quietly, your world is smaller than you think. Something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe. Or recognition. You don't know anything about my world. I know your father tried to leave it. I know he found peace in a diner booth and burnt toast. I know. She stopped herself. What? Frank leaned forward. What do you know? I know you're here every morning drinking coffee you probably don't even like, asking questions you're afraid to hear the answers to. Mabel held his gaze. So why don't you just ask what you really want to know? The diner hummed around them. Sal reading his sports page, the nurses gossiping, the construction crew arguing about last night's game. Normal people living normal lives while Mabel stood across from Brooklyn's most feared crime boss, daring him to be honest. Frank's voice dropped so low she almost didn't hear it. What did he talk about? When you were with him? The question cracked something open in her chest, because that's what this was really about. Not protection, not threats. A son desperate to understand the father who'd abandoned him. He talked about the rain, Mabel said softly. How it reminded him of your mother. How she used to dance in it when you were small. Before, she stopped. Before I ruined everything, Frank finished, his voice hollow. He didn't say that. He said you had her eyes. That when you were 5, you used to collect pennies to buy her flowers from the bodega on the corner. Mabel watched emotions war across Frank's face. He said loving you was the easiest thing he'd ever done, and losing you was the hardest. Frank's jaw clenched. His hands, wrapped around the coffee mug, had gone white at the knuckles. He left me, he said finally. Built an empire with my bare hands, became exactly what he raised me to be, and he just left. Disappeared, like I was nothing. Maybe he left because you became what he was most afraid of. The words hung between them like a detonation. Frank stood abruptly, the stool scraping harsh against linoleum. For a moment, Mabel thought he might explode, violence radiating off him in waves. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. But he just pulled out his wallet, dropped a 50 on the counter. "Keep the change," he said, voice tight. "And stop trying to save people who don't want to be saved." He turned toward the door. "Frank." He stopped. Didn't turn around. "Your father does want to be saved," Mabel said. "That's why he's asking about me. That's why he left you that letter." "What letter?" "The one he made me promise to give you. When you were ready." Frank finally turned, and his expression was devastation. "I'll never be ready. Then I guess I'll be waiting." He left without another word. But Mabel saw it, the slight hesitation before he walked out. The crack in his armor growing wider. She'd seen that look before. On Vincent's face, the first time she'd cut his toast. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a nurse from Mercy Hospital who looked uncomfortable holding it, like it might explode in her hands. "Mr. Callie asked me to bring this to you," she said, glancing nervously around the diner. "He was very insistent, said it had to be you, specifically." The waitress with the kind smile. Mabel's hands trembled as she took the envelope. It was thin, cream-colored, expensive paper that felt wrong in her calloused fingers. Her name was written across the front in Vincent's shaky handwriting, the same script from the note in his fedora. She waited until her shift ended, until she was alone in her shoebox apartment with its water-stained ceiling and boxes of abandoned art supplies, before she opened it. "Dearest Mabel, I am writing this with hands that barely remember how to hold a pen, so forgive me if my words wander like an old man's mind. You reminded me what love once felt like. Not the violent kind, the kind that builds empires and destroys enemies. The quiet kind, the kind my Maria had. The kind that cuts toast into triangles and asks about dreams, without expecting anything in return. My son doesn't remember that kind of love. He only knows the other, the kind that takes and demands and breaks. I made him that way. I built him from blood and fear, and then I ran from what I'd created. But he wasn't always a monster. Once, he was a boy who collected pennies for his mother, who cried when birds fell from trees, who wanted to be a teacher, of all things. Can you imagine? Frank Callie, teaching children about books and numbers instead of ledgers and bodies. I took that boy and buried him under concrete and rage. When I'm gone, and Mabel, I will be gone soon. Hearts like mine don't get many warnings. Someone needs to help him remember. Not to fix him, not to save him, just to remind him that the boy isn't completely dead. I think you might be the only person brave enough, or foolish enough. I haven't decided which. There's something Frank doesn't know. Something I've hidden for 5 years because knowing would destroy what little humanity he has left. His mother, my Maria, she didn't die in crossfire. She wasn't killed by enemies or caught in violence meant for me. She took her own life. She discovered what Frank had become. The rumors reached her, whispers of brutality, of executions, of a son who'd surpassed his father's cruelty. She confronted him one night, begged him to stop. He told her it was too late, that this was who he was now. 3 days later, I found her in our bedroom, pills, a note that said only, "I cannot watch my son become death itself." I told Frank it was a rival family, gave him a target for his rage, watched him build an empire on that lie because I was too cowardly to tell him the truth that his mother couldn't survive loving what he'd become. He thinks his violence was justice. It was grief eating itself alive. When I'm gone, give him the second letter, the one she wrote, the one I've been too afraid to share. Help him see what love really was. Not possession, not protection, just love. You have that in you, Mabel. I saw it in how you held my coffee cup like it mattered, how you spoke to me like I was human. Maybe you can do the same for my son. With all the gratitude my broken heart can hold. Vincent. Mabel read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face, hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. Inside the envelope was a second, smaller one, sealed, addressed in different handwriting, feminine, elegant, to my beloved Francesco. Maria's letter. The truth Frank had spent 5 years running from. Mabel held it like it was made of glass and dynamite. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Frank's face when he'd asked what Vincent talked about, the hollowness in his eyes, the way he'd said, "I'll never be ready," like he was sentencing himself. At 3 a.m., she stood at her window watching the street below. Rain fell in sheets, turning the Brooklyn night into liquid darkness. A black car sat across the street, engine off, headlights dark, but someone was inside, watching her building, watching her window. Mabel's heart stuttered. She knew, without seeing his face, who it was. Frank Cowley, sitting in the rain at 3 a.m, staring at the apartment of a waitress who'd promised to deliver a letter that would break him. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. In the car below, she saw the brief flare of a lighter, the glow of a cigarette, then the engine started. The car pulled away, swallowed by rain and darkness. But Mabel knew he'd be back. Because some storms don't pass, they just gather strength. Frank stopped pretending he came for the coffee. It started subtly arriving earlier, staying longer, asking questions that had nothing to do with his father. He'd watch Mabel work with an intensity that made her skin prickle, like he was trying to solve an equation that kept changing variables. "Why do you stay here?" he asked one morning, gesturing at the diner's cracked vinyl and flickering lights. "You're smart, talented. Vincent showed me the sketches you drew on napkins." Mabel's hands paused mid-pour. "He kept those? He kept everything you touched." Frank's voice was quiet. "Like you were proof of something." "Proof of what?" "That good people still existed." The words landed soft but heavy, like snow that would later become an avalanche. Their conversations became a rhythm. He'd arrive at 7:30 Vincent's time and sit at the counter. She'd pour his coffee. They'd talk in the spaces between orders, building something fragile and unnamed between the breakfast rush and burnt toast. He told her about the boy who'd wanted to teach, about his mother's laugh, about the day everything changed when he'd watched his father nearly beaten to death and decided fear was better than love. She told him about art school, about her mother's slow death, about paintings she couldn't afford to finish, and dreams she'd buried under practicality. "You should paint again," Frank said one morning, his voice carrying an unexpected gentleness. "With what money?" He pulled out his wallet. "Don't," Mabel said sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Try to fix things with cash. I'm not a problem you can throw money at." Frank's jaw tightened. "Everyone else is. Then maybe that's the problem." The diner had started noticing. Sal watched over his newspaper with knowing eyes. Brenda whispered theories to anyone who'd listen. Even Lou, perpetually oblivious, had commented on their intense little coffee clatches. But it was the customers from Frank's world who worried Mabel most. She'd see them sometimes men in dark cars parked outside, watching through tinted windows. Once, a man in an expensive suit came in, ordered nothing, and stared at her for 10 minutes before leaving. His eyes had been cold calculation. "They're checking you out," Brenda said nervously. "Frank's people, making sure you're not, I don't know, a cop, a threat. I'm a waitress. You're whatever Frank Cowley says you are. And right now, he's saying you matter." The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. One morning, Frank arrived with blood on his knuckles. He tried to hide it, keeping his right hand in his pocket, but Mabel saw the split skin, the bruising already purpling beneath his expensive shirt cuff. "What happened?" She reached for his hand before thinking better of it. Frank pulled away instinctively. "Business." "That's not business. That's violence. In my world, they're the same thing." Mabel grabbed the first aid kit Lou kept behind the counter mostly for burns and knife cuts. But it would work. "Sit. I'm fine. You're bleeding on my counter. Sit." Something in her voice made him obey. He sat on the stool like a scolded child while Mabel cleaned his knuckles with antiseptic. His hands were surprisingly elegant long fingers, careful scars, the hands of someone who'd built empires and broken bones in equal measure. "Someone said something they shouldn't have," Frank said quietly. "About you." Mabel's hand stilled. "About me?" "That you were accessible. That maybe I'd lost interest. That they could." His jaw clenched. "I made sure they understood their mistake." "Frank." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "You can't hurt people who talk about me." "Why not?" "Because that's not protection. That's possession." "What's the difference?" The question hung between them, raw and honest. "Protection means keeping me safe," Mabel said softly, still holding his damaged hand. "Possession means controlling who gets near me. One is love, the other is fear." Frank stared at their joined hands, her small, calloused fingers wrapped around his bruised knuckles. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to do the first one." "Then learn." "What if I can't?" Mabel squeezed his hand gently. "Then at least you tried." For a moment, the diner disappeared. The clatter of dishes, Brenda's commentary, Lou's yelling, all of it faded into background noise. There was only this: a waitress holding the hand of a monster, trying to find the man underneath. Frank lifted his other hand, hesitated, then touched her cheek with his fingertips. The gesture was so tentative, so uncertain, it broke something in her chest. "You're the only thing in my life that doesn't hurt," he whispered. Before Mabel could respond, the diner door opened. A man stepped inside, tall, scarred, radiating menace. "Frank," he said. "We have a problem." Frank's expression shuddered instantly. The vulnerable man disappeared, replaced by the boss Brooklyn feared. He stood, pulled his hand from hers. "Stay here," he ordered. Then he walked out into whatever violence waited. And Mabel understood. Loving Frank Callie meant watching him walk toward danger and not being able to follow. Would you risk loving the man everyone fears? Subscribe if you believe even monsters deserve a second chance. Refuse and drop your reasons in the comments. But be honest, what scares you more, him or your heart? The call came at 2 a.m. Mabel woke to her phone buzzing against the nightstand, the screen too bright in the darkness. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Nothing good happened at 2 a.m., but something made her pick up. "Mabel Rossi?" A woman's voice, professional, tired. "Yes? This is Mercy Hospital. Vincent Callie has been asking for you. A pause. "He's asking you to come now. It's important." Mabel was dressed and out the door in 5 minutes. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation. A nurse led her through fluorescent corridors to the ICU, where Vincent lay in a bed that made him look impossibly small. Tubes ran from his arms. Machines beeped steady rhythms. His fedora sat on the side table. Someone had brought it, probably Frank. Vincent's eyes opened when she entered. They were clearer than she expected. "Mabel," he rasped. "You came." She pulled a chair close, took his trembling hand. "Of course I came. Where's Frank?" "I don't know. They only called me." Vincent's expression tightened with something like pain. "Good. Need to tell you first, before he comes." Each word seemed to cost him. "The letter. Did you read it?" "Yes." "Then you know. About Maria. About the lie." His grip strengthened slightly. "But there's more. Something I didn't write. Something he needs to hear. From someone he trusts. Vincent, you should rest." "No time for rest." His laugh became a cough. "Dying men don't rest. They confess." Mabel squeezed his hand gently. Vincent's eyes fixed on the ceiling, seeing something or someone she couldn't. "Frank thinks his empire was built on justice, revenge for his mother. But it was built on my cowardice. I gave him a target because I couldn't give him the truth. He needs to hear this from you. He won't listen. Not to me. I'm the man who abandoned him." Vincent turned his head, meeting her gaze. "But you're the woman who showed him kindness without wanting power. That's why he keeps coming back. Not for coffee, for proof that he's still human. I don't know if I can... The letter from Maria, when you give it to him." Vincent's breathing became labored. "Stay with him. Don't let him be alone when his world collapses. Promise me." "I promise." The door opened. Frank stepped inside, and the temperature dropped. He looked from Mabel to his father, jaw tight. "What's going on?" "Francesco," Vincent said softly, using his full name, the one his mother had given him. Frank flinched like he'd been struck. "I need to tell you something. Before..." Vincent gestured weakly at the machines. "Before it's too late." Frank moved closer, his usual confidence stripped away, leaving only a son facing his father's death. Mabel started to stand, to give them privacy, but Vincent's hand tightened on hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please." She sat back down, caught between them. "Your mother," Vincent began, his voice gaining strange strength. "What I told you about her death, it was a lie." Frank went perfectly still. "What?" "There was no rival family, no attack, no enemy." Each word landed like a stone. "She took her own life, Francesco. Because of what you'd become. The machines kept beeping, the fluorescent lights kept humming, but the world had stopped." "No." Frank's voice was hollow. "You're lying." "I wish I was." Vincent's eyes filled with tears. "She found out what you were doing. The violence, the executions. She begged you to stop. Do you remember? 5 years ago. She came to you crying, asking you to walk away." Frank's face had gone white. "She said it was too much, that I'd gone too far. I told her." His voice cracked. I told her it was too late to change. 3 days later I found her. Vincent's tears fell freely now. Pills. And a note. She wrote that she couldn't watch her son become death itself. Frank staggered backward like he'd been shot. His hand found the wall for support. I gave you a lie, Vincent continued. Because I was a coward. Because I thought your rage would be easier than your guilt. I let you build an empire on grief that should have been. Should have been. Mabel finished quietly. Vincent nodded. I'm sorry, my son. I'm so sorry. Frank couldn't speak. Couldn't move. He just stood there breaking in slow motion. Every piece of certainty he'd built his life on crumbling. She left you a letter, Mabel said softly. Your mother. I have it. Frank's eyes found hers devastated, lost, searching for something to hold on to. 5 years, he whispered. Everything I did. Everyone I hurt. It was all. His voice shattered. It was all for nothing. No, Vincent said. Not nothing. You can still choose. While there's time, choose to be the man she wanted. The teacher. The boy with pennies. Frank slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold hospital floor, head in his hands. And for the first time since she'd met him, Mabel saw Frank Callie cry. Frank didn't leave the hospital for 3 days. He slept in the chair beside Vincent's bed, refused food, barely spoke. Mabel brought him coffee from Luna's Black, 2 sugars, and sat with him in the terrible silence. Sometimes Vincent was awake, sometimes sedated. But Frank remained, a statue carved from guilt and grief. On the 3rd night, Vincent passed quietly. No dramatic goodbye, no final wisdom, just a breath that didn't come back, machines that suddenly screamed, and nurses who moved with practiced efficiency while Frank stood frozen, unable to process that the man he'd spent 5 years running from was gone. Mabel held his hand through it all, felt it turn cold as the weight of everything settled on his shoulders. The funeral was small. Frank had wanted it that way, no spectacle. No parade of criminals paying respects to a man they'd feared. Just a quiet ceremony at a cemetery on the edge of Brooklyn, where Maria was buried. Mabel stood beside Frank as they lowered Vincent into the ground. He wore a black suit that fit perfectly but looked wrong on him, like armor that no longer served its purpose. His face was a mask, but his hand trembled in hers. When it was over, when the last mourners had drifted away, Frank finally spoke. I need to read it, my mother's letter. Mabel had been carrying it for days, waiting. She pulled the envelope from her purse, Maria's elegant handwriting, still pristine despite the years Vincent had kept it hidden. Frank took it with shaking hands. For a long moment, he just stared at his name written in his mother's script. Then he opened it. Mabel watched emotions cascade across his face as he read shock, pain, understanding, devastation. When he finished, he read it again. Then a 3rd time, as if repetition might change the words. Finally, he handed it to Mabel. Read it, please, out loud. Her voice trembled as she began. My beloved Francesco, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and your father has finally found the courage to give you truth instead of comfort. I want you to know that leaving was not your fault. It was mine. I was too weak to watch you become what this life demanded, too soft to understand that survival sometimes requires hardness. But I also need you to know this. The boy I raised, the one who saved injured birds, who read books until dawn, who wanted to teach children because he believed in their goodness, that boy is not dead. He is buried, yes, hidden under layers of violence and necessity, but not dead. I see him sometimes. In your eyes when you think no one is watching. In the way you still knock on wood for luck. In how you close your eyes when you laugh, just like you did as a child. Your father built you into a weapon. This life sharpened you into something terrible. But Francesco, my sweet boy, you chose to stay sharp. Every day, you make that choice. I cannot watch you choose darkness anymore. It breaks my heart in ways that have no repair. So I am choosing peace. And I am begging you from whatever comes after this to choose light. Not for me, not for your father, for the boy who collected pennies, for the man he could still become. Walk away, my son. Please, walk away before there's nothing left of you to save. With all the love a mother's heart can hold, Maria. Silence filled the cemetery. Even the wind had stopped, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Frank's voice came out broken. She asked me to walk away, and I told her it was too late. He looked at Mabel with eyes that held 5 years of accumulated pain. What if it is? What if I'm too far gone? Vincent didn't think so. Your mother didn't think so. Mabel stepped closer. And I don't think so. You don't know what I've done. The people I've hurt. I know you come to a diner every morning to drink coffee you don't like because it reminds you of your father. I know you ask about my dreams like they matter. I know you're capable of gentleness even when the world tells you it's weakness. She touched his face, felt him lean into her palm like a man starving for tenderness. That's who you are, Frank. Not what you've done, who you are. And who am I? Someone worth saving. He pulled her close then, suddenly, desperately, not with the control he usually maintained, but with the raw need of someone drowning. His arms wrapped around her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Help me, he whispered into her hair. I don't know how to stop being this. Then let me show you. They stood there among the tombstones as the sun set over Brooklyn, 2 people trying to build something gentle in a world that rewarded violence. But the world wasn't finished with them yet. The black SUV appeared 3 days later. Mabel was closing the diner, locking the front door, when headlights cut through the darkness. Multiple vehicles, men emerging like shadows given form. She recognized one of them, the scarred man who'd interrupted her moment with Frank weeks ago. His name was Sal. Not her regular Sal, the taxi driver, but Salvatore Costa, Frank's former underboss. Mabel Rossi, he said, approaching with predatory calm. We need to talk about Frank. I have nothing to say to you. That's unfortunate, because he's been making decisions that affect our business. Decisions influenced by, he gestured at her, sentiment. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Sal pulled out his phone, showed her a photo Frank at the cemetery, holding her. Another photo them at the diner, her bandaging his hand. He's going soft, talking about walking away, about dismantling operations, about peace. He said the word like it was poison. That's you, your influence. Maybe he's just tired of killing people. Men like Frank don't get tired, they get weak, and weak men get us all killed. Sal stepped closer. So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear. Take money, take a new life, take whatever you want. But you're going to leave Frank to us. No. That wasn't a request. Mabel's heart hammered, but she stood her ground. Then I guess you'll have to make me. Sal smiled cold, calculating. We were hoping you'd say that. The other men moved closer, surrounding her. Mabel's hand found her phone in her pocket, fingers fumbling for Frank's number. A car engine roared. Headlights blazed. Frank's Escalade crashed through the circle of men like a missile, scattering bodies. He emerged from the driver's seat with a gun in each hand, his expression pure murder. Touch her, he said quietly, and I'll make what happened to Torino look like mercy. The standoff hung in the air, weapons drawn, loyalties tested, violence balanced on a knife's edge. Sal raised his hand slowly. This is exactly what we're talking about, Frank. You're compromised, making emotional decisions. You're right. Frank's voice was ice. I am emotional. And right now, I'm emotionally invested in putting a bullet in anyone who threatens her. So you'll kill us? Your own people? I'll kill anyone. That's what you made me. That's what I'm trying to stop being. He glanced at Mabel, something softening in his eyes. But if you force me to choose between my old life and the only person who makes me want a new one, there's no choice. Mabel stepped forward, placing herself between Frank and the guns. Stop, all of you. This isn't how this ends. Mabel. Frank tried to pull her back. No. She turned to face Sal. You think I'm making him weak? Maybe I am. Maybe kindness is weakness in your world. But look at him. She gestured at Frank. Really look. Is this the face of a weak man? Or is this someone strong enough to walk away from power because he finally understands what it cost? Sal studied Frank, saw something that made him pause. You want out, he said finally. Not a question. I want peace, Frank replied. I want to wake up without blood on my hands. I want, he looked at Mabel. I want a chance to be someone she doesn't have to be afraid of. They won't let you walk away clean. You know too much. You've done too much. Then I'll face whatever comes. But on my terms. Frank lowered his guns. I'm done building empires. Tell the families I'm retiring. Tell them Brooklyn is open territory. Tell them whatever you want. But tell them Frank Callie died with his father. Sal laughed bitter, disbelieving. For a waitress. You're throwing away everything for a waitress. No, Frank said softly. I'm throwing away nothing to keep everything that matters. The tension held for another heartbeat. Then Sal holstered his weapon. You're a fool, Frank. Probably, but I'm a fool who might actually sleep tonight. Sal and his men retreated to their vehicles, engines starting, taillights disappearing into Brooklyn's darkness. When they were gone, Frank finally breathed. He turned to Mabel, cupped her face in his hands. Are you okay? She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. I meant what I said. I'm walking away. From all of it. Frank, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you were right. This isn't who I want to be anymore. He pressed his forehead to hers. Teach me how to be the man my mother wanted, the one you deserve. Mabel's tears finally fell. We'll learn together. And there, in the shadow of Luna's diner, under streetlights that had witnessed countless crimes, Frank Callie kissed her not with possession or dominance, but with the tender desperation of someone being reborn. Walking away from an empire, Mabel quickly learned, was more complicated than simply deciding to leave. The first week after Frank's declaration, 3 attempts were made on his life. Not by Sal, he'd kept his word about stepping back, but by rivals who saw vulnerability as opportunity. Men who'd feared Frank Callie for years suddenly sensed blood in the water. Frank handled each attempt with the brutal efficiency that had made him legendary, but each one took a visible toll. Not physically, he was too skilled for that, but spiritually. Every time he had to resort to violence, Mabel watched something in him dim. How do I stop being good at the thing that's destroying me? He asked one night, sitting in her tiny apartment with his head in his hands. They'd been spending more time here, away from the diner, away from prying eyes. Her apartment had become their sanctuary, the one place where Frank could take off his armor and just be Francesco, the boy who'd wanted to teach, the man who was trying to remember how. You don't have to be perfect, Mabel said, sitting beside him on her worn couch. You just have to keep choosing differently. I've made so many wrong choices. How do I know if I'm even capable of making right ones? She took his scarred hands in hers. Because you're here. Because you're trying. That's already a choice your mother would be proud of. Frank looked at their joined hands, his marked by violence, hers stained with coffee and hard work. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, but you're here anyway. He laughed a real laugh, the kind that reached his eyes. You're brutally honest. You know that? Someone has to be. Everyone else is too afraid of you. You're not afraid? Mabel considered. I'm terrified, just not of you. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid that one of these attempts will succeed. I'm afraid that, her voice caught, that I'll choose the violence because it's easier than choosing you. She nodded. Frank shifted closer, turning to face her fully. The dim lamplight cast shadows across his features, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Mabel, I've spent 5 years building walls, burying everything soft because softness got people killed. My mother, my father, everyone I tried to protect by being harder, meaner, more ruthless than anyone else. You don't have to protect me that way. I know. That's what scares me. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Because protecting you the right way with trust and honesty and partnership that requires being the person I buried. And I don't know if I remember how. Then remember this. Mabel brought his hand to her chest, over her heart. Feel that? That's what it's like to be near someone you care about. Not possess, not control, just care about. Frank's eyes darkened with emotion. His hand spread across her chest, feeling her heartbeat accelerate under his touch. It's fast. You make me nervous. I don't want to make you nervous. I want to make you... He stopped, struggling with words. I want to make you feel safe, happy, like your dreams matter, like you matter. I do feel that way. When you're like this. When you're just Frank. Not the boss, not the legend, just the man who drinks coffee he doesn't like because it makes him feel close to his father. Something broke open in Frank's expression. I love you. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that expanded, changed everything. Mabel's breath caught. Frank, I know I shouldn't. I know I have no right. I know I'm still covered in the wreckage of my old life. But I love you, Mabel Rossi. I love how you see people. How you cut toast into triangles like it's an act of devotion. How you look at me like I'm someone worth saving even when I know I'm not. You are worth saving. Maybe. But that's not why I love you. I love you because you make me want to be worth it. You make me want to wake up and choose light instead of darkness. You make me believe that maybe the boy who collected pennies isn't completely dead. Tears streamed down Mabel's face. I love you too. God help me. I love you too. Frank cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away tears. Say it again. I love you, Francesco Colli. I love the man you are. The man you were. The man you're trying to become. He kissed her, then soft at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might break. But Mabel pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, pouring 5 years of loneliness and 3 months of growing feelings into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Frank rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. The normal relationship thing. The building a life thing. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. What if I fail? What if I slip back into? Then I'll be there to remind you who you are. And you'll do the same for me when I forget I'm more than just a waitress drowning in debt. Frank smiled, genuine, full, transforming his entire face. You're so much more than that. You're the woman who resurrected a dead man's heart. They spent the rest of the night talking about everything and nothing. Frank told her about the teacher he'd wanted to be, the books he'd loved, the life he'd imagined before violence became his language. Mabel shared her dreams of painting, of galleries, of creating beauty instead of just serving it. As dawn broke over Brooklyn, painting Mabel's apartment in soft gold light, Frank held her close on the couch. I have to tell you something, he said quietly. There's a hearing next week. The DA has been building a case. They want me to testify against the families in exchange for immunity. Mabel's stomach dropped. That's dangerous. It's necessary. If I'm really walking away, I need to burn the bridges so thoroughly there's no path back. He tightened his arms around her. But it means going into witness protection for a while. Maybe months. Maybe longer. We'll be separated. Yes. Mabel turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. Then we make these days count. Every morning, every conversation, every moment, we make them count. And after, when it's over, we find each other again, no matter how long it takes. Frank kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I'll find you, Mabel. Even if I have to search the whole world, even if it takes years, I'll find you. Promise. I promise. They sealed it with a kiss as the sun rose, two people who'd found love in the least likely place, holding onto each other as the world they knew prepared to burn down around them. Because loving Frank Colli meant accepting that nothing would be easy. But as Mabel discovered that morning, wrapped in his arms while Brooklyn woke outside her window, some things worth having were worth fighting for, even if the fight never truly ended. Don't let their story end in silence. Subscribe now because not every sinner gets a chance to love clean. If you'd still walk away, tell us in the comments why some hearts don't deserve saving. 6 months later, Mabel stood outside Luna's diner with a paintbrush in her hand and tears in her eyes. The renovation had taken 3 months. Lou had finally sold her the place too old, too tired to keep fighting the inevitable decline. With the money Vincent had left her in his will, a surprise that still made her cry, she'd transformed the fading relic into something new. The sign above the door no longer read, Luna's. It read Vincent's place. The interior glowed with warm light. She'd kept the original booths but reupholstered them in deep burgundy. The sticky linoleum was gone, replaced with warm hardwood. The walls, once dingy and gray, now displayed local art, including several of her own paintings, finally finished after years of gathering dust. But booth 7 remained exactly as it was, Vincent's booth, with a small brass plaque that read, "Reserved for those who need kindness." The diner had reopened 2 weeks ago to surprising success. Word had spread about the waitress who'd loved a mobster's father and transformed a dying diner into something hopeful. People came for the story, but they stayed for the food and the warmth Mabel had always offered. Brenda still worked there, softer now, telling stories about the old days to anyone who'd listen. Sal, the taxi driver, still ordered 2 eggs over easy. The nurses still traded gossip over pancakes. But every morning at 7:30, Mabel still poured 2 cups of coffee. One for herself, one for the empty seat at the counter, just in case. Frank had entered witness protection the week after their confession. She'd watched him walk away into federal custody, watched him disappear into a system designed to erase people. No contact, no updates, no guarantee he'd ever come back. The DA had been thrilled. Frank's testimony had dismantled 3 major crime families. Brooklyn's underworld had fractured, scattered, rebuilt itself into something smaller and less organized. And Frank Callie had vanished like he'd never existed. Mabel touched the locket around her neck, a gift from him before he left, containing a photo of Vincent and Maria, young and in love. On the back, he'd engraved, "For the boy with pennies, for the teacher he'll become." She'd learned to live with absence, to find joy in the diner, in her art, in the community she'd built. She'd learned that love didn't always look like Hollywood endings. Sometimes it looked like holding space for someone, even when they couldn't be there. The bell above the door chimed. Mabel turned, expecting the morning rush, and froze. A man stood in the doorway, plain gray jacket, jeans, no expensive suit, no bodyguards, hair slightly longer, touched with more silver, glasses wire-rimmed, professorial. But those eyes. She'd know those eyes anywhere. "Frank?" Her voice came out as a whisper. He smiled, nervous, hopeful, completely different from the dangerous man who'd first walked through that door. "Actually, it's Francesco now. I'm going back to my mother's name. Francesco Costa." Mabel's hands trembled. "You're really here. I'm really here." He stepped inside, looking around at the transformed space. "You did this? It's beautiful. Vincent left me money. I couldn't just. I had to make something good from it." Francesco's eyes landed on booth 7, on the brass plaque. His face crumpled briefly before he composed himself. He'd love this. "There's coffee." Mabel gestured to the counter, muscle memory taking over. "If you want some. Is there room for one more cup?" The words hung between them an echo of her outline, of the ending she'd imagined but never believed would come true. "Only if you pour the second round," she managed, tears streaming freely now. Francesco crossed the diner in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms. He smelled different, less expensive cologne, more simple soap. He felt different too, less rigid, more relaxed, but his embrace was the same desperate tenderness she remembered. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm sorry it took so long. The trial ran over, and then protective custody, and then, you're here now. That's what matters." He pulled back just enough to see her face, his hands framing her cheeks. "I have so much to tell you. They set me up with a new identity. I'm teaching now. High school. English literature. Can you believe it? Me, teaching teenagers about Shakespeare." Mabel laughed through her tears. "Your mother would be so proud. I think about her every day. And my father. And you." He kissed her forehead. "Especially you. Every morning I'd wake up and think about you pouring coffee in this diner, and it kept me going. I poured you coffee anyway. Every morning at 7:30, just in case." Francesco's eyes glistened. "Show me." She led him to the counter, to the 2 cups she'd prepared out of habit and hope. They sat side by side on the red vinyl stools, the same stools where they'd first built their fragile connection. "To new beginnings," Francesco said, raising his cup. "To old kindnesses," Mabel replied, clinking hers against his. They drank together as morning light streamed through the window, painting everything gold. "So what happens now?" Mabel asked. Francesco set down his cup and took her hand. "Now? Now I do what I should have done months ago." He slid off the stool and impossibly, wonderfully got down on one knee. Mabel's heart stopped. "I don't have a ring yet. I don't have much of anything, actually. Just a studio apartment and a teacher's salary and a second chance I don't deserve." His voice shook. "But I have love, Mabel. I have so much love for you that sometimes I don't know what to do with it all. You saved me. You saw the person I could be when I'd forgotten he existed, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you weren't wrong. Francesco, marry me, please. Let me wake up every morning and pour you coffee. Let me cut your toast into triangles. Let me be the man who makes you smile the way you made my father smile. Let me," his voice broke, "let me love you the way my mother loved my father. Purely, completely, without darkness." Mabel pulled him up and kissed him deep. Certain, full of yes, and always, and forever. When they broke apart, she was laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. On one condition. Anything. You have to help me run this place. Vincent's place needs both of us." Francesco looked around the diner at the art on the walls, at booth 7 with its brass plaque, at the customers starting to filter in for breakfast. A mobster turned teacher and a waitress turned artist, running a diner together. That's quite a story. It's our story, Mabel corrected. And it's just beginning. The bell above the door jingled as more customers arrived. Brenda walked in for her shift, took one look at them, and burst into tears. I knew it. I knew he'd come back. Sal, the taxi driver, ordered his 2 eggs over easy and left his usual tip, but added an extra 20 with a note. For the happy ending, some people deserve them. The nurses applauded. The construction crew whistled. Luna's no. Vincent's place filled with the sound of celebration. Francesco and Mabel stood behind the counter, hands intertwined, pouring coffee and cutting toast and building the life that violence had tried to prevent. Outside, Brooklyn hummed its endless song. Inside, love had the last word. Because sometimes kindness doesn't just save one person. Sometimes it saves 2. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it saves everyone who witnesses it. Vincent's fedora still sat on the shelf behind the counter, next to the coffee filters, a reminder of where it all started. Of the old man who'd taught a waitress that small gestures matter. Of the son who'd learned that empires built on blood always crumble, but love, real love, endures. As the morning rush swelled around them, Francesco leaned close to Mabel and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For cutting my father's toast, for seeing past the monster, for teaching me that redemption isn't about forgetting who you were, but about choosing who you'll become. Mabel squeezed his hand. We chose each other. That's all that matters. And as the sun climbed higher over Brooklyn, Vincent's place, a diner built on kindness, saved by love, and blessed by the ghost of an old man who'd believed in both, became exactly what it was always meant to be. Home. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.